All right. What a day today was, man. A lot going on, like just around, you know. And you know what's crazy about shorter weeks, because this week was started off with Memorial Day. And so the work week really didn't get kicked off until Tuesday, is that you would expect this to be an abbreviated week, one that feels quick, right? That isn't as taxing on your body because you're a day short. You had an extra day of rest. That is not how I feel on this Friday. But nonetheless, we are here to complete the month of May, um, the calendar to June, and we're going to do it the right way. Got a couple of topics, one really in particular that I want to discuss tonight. So we're going to get into that. I think it's a really interesting debate, and it kind of connects a bunch of different things too. It's like it has tentacles that stretches out and touches different topics that aren't necessarily directly connected, but indirectly you could also have conversations that piggyback off of the one we're going to have tonight. So anyway, y'all know what it is. You're locked in to the 422nd installment of the Louie T Network podcast that starts now. The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description. Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the 422nd installment of the Louie T Network podcast. Of course, I'm your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Y'all know what it is. Happy Friday to everyone. Happy Friday night to everyone. Hopefully you've already gotten your workday out of the way. Some of you may be heading to work now. Some of you are already at work. Whatever the case may be, hopefully I can help you with whatever you've got going on. But we're going to chop it up tonight. This will be a relatively quick podcast. I'm not going to keep you here like for 9 hours. But I think the conversation that we're going to have tonight is going to be one that is spirited and could lead to other conversations and other dialogues that may take a little bit longer. But at any event, we're definitely going to talk about the receiver position off the strength of Jalen Waddle getting paid and the ripple effect from him getting paid and what that may mean. And then we'll then kind of venture into the conversation about receiver and how teams may be looking to attack the receiver position in the future. Could we be heading into a running back type territory with the receiver position? I will explain a little bit later on. Bears are going to be on Hard Knocks. We'll talk about that a little bit later on and the significance of that and how that came to be. And obviously NBA playoffs, and that's where we're going to start the show right now real quick. So, I mean, we'll have plenty of time to preview the NBA Finals. It doesn't start until Thursday, June the 6th. So we got plenty of time to tackle that and really, handicap that series. I just want to quickly finish up the Western Conference Finals. Mavs took care of business in Game 5. We made all of this, much to do about nothing. All of this scuttlebutt about, oh man, the Mavs could be in trouble. They just blew a golden opportunity, and then Luka quickly put that to rest. He's such a savage, is Luka Doncic. I mean, he is a monster. He's an animal, especially on the road. He's so disrespectful on the road. What I've seen him do on the road in closeout situations has just been ridiculous. And they had this crazy stat that they showed. after a loss in the playoffs, he's averaging 34.3 points a game. Are you serious? Like, are you kidding me? Like, Luka definitely came out because honestly, they should have swept the Timberwolves. And they didn't sweep them because Luka and Kyrie didn't make shots. That's what it ultimately boiled down to. We could sit here and talk about Derek Lively being injured and this, that, and the third. If they would have just made shots, they would have won that game. But they didn't. They didn't shoot the ball well. The combination of Cat and Anthony Edwards did shoot the ball a little bit better, and so they ended up winning the game. But Luka took it personal, came out and established early that this series is over. Like, just in case you were getting these thoughts of extending this thing, pushing it back to Dallas in game 6 and putting all of that pressure on us, we're just going to close up shop tonight. Luka came out firing on all cylinders, shooting from all over the court, 30 feet. Then he got to the logo, and it got insane at one point where he was shooting heat checks from like half court just to check to see if it was going in. And it was that kind of a night for him. Really, the quarter, first quarter, he had 20 points. He scored more points in the first quarter than the entire Timberwolves team. And at halftime, he and Kyrie Irving had more points than the Minnesota Timberwolves entire team. So that was the type of night that it was for the Timberwolves. I mean, this thing was up past 30 in the third quarter, very reminiscent of when they disposed of the Suns in game 7 a couple of years back, where, and Chris Paul cuts it to 41 or some shit like that, where it was just such an embarrassment. Like, my homeboy is a Suns fan, and I was messing with him the other day, telling him, I remember when your whole squad was on the bench with like 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter, down like 37 in a game 7 at the crib, right? Like, how embarrassing is that? Show some balls, show some fight. Anyway, Luka's a savage. And Kyrie is the perfect wingman for him because of his experience, because he's himself a closer and able to make tough shots. And this is a dangerous Mavericks team. We'll talk more about them, but I talked about the lack of experience in the playoffs and how this isn't the NFL, this isn't Major League Baseball, this isn't even hockey, where you can just show up and win big. You might win a series or two that you weren't supposed to win, but you're not getting all the way to the NBA Finals without experience. And the Timberwolves simply don't have it. The fact that they even made it this far is a testament to their grit and their determination. They were down 22 on the road in a game 7 to the defending NBA champions, and they just ran out of gas. And the Timberwolves were able to come back and steal that game. But kudos to them for making it to the Western Conference Finals. It was a hell of a season for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And what they've effectively done is they've established themselves as a team to be reckoned with now. And that experience that they gained this year is invaluable. It'll help them if they are to get back to this point next year. They could actually then find themselves getting all the way to the, NBA Finals. This experience is immeasurable. So they've got something that my Grizzlies don't have, and I'm jealous of it, right? We don't have Western Conference Finals experience. The Timberwolves, even though they went out with a whimper, they still played in the Western Conference Finals. They know what it's like to dethrone an NBA champion. They know what it's like to go on the road in a hostile environment and win a game 7. I can't say that my team knows how to do that. They haven't been through those murky waters before. So kudos to the Timberwolves on a hell of a season. And then the Dallas Mavericks. Who saw this coming? I can't say that I did. I mean, before the playoffs started, you could have asked me, give me a handful of teams that have a chance to win a title, and I would have given you a handful of teams. It wouldn't have been that hard. I just don't think Dallas would have been included in that conversation, which is crazy. Now that I'm looking at their roster and the way that they're playing, but I didn't think they were going to beat the Clippers. But then again, I didn't expect, I should have, Kawhi Leonard to be hurt the entire series and be in and out, waffling back and forth. But that's nor here nor there. The bottom line is Dallas Mavericks advance, and I think we're going to have a whale of an NBA Finals, but we'll talk about that next week. So, let's get to the big discussion that I want to have tonight. And so, with that said, let's get to the gem dropping session, shall we? Yeah, I think we shall. Let me drop this gem on your melon. Open your mind, let your conscience be free. You're now rolling with your man, Louie T double E. Let me open you up. Get you thinking a little bit. So, yesterday, Jalen Waddle, or was it the day before yesterday? I think it was yesterday. Yeah, I think it was yesterday. Jalen Waddle signed a 3-year, $84 million extension with the Miami Dolphins. Well-deserved, I may add. He's one of the better receivers in the league. When you look at that money, when you look at the AAV of that, you're talking what, 28 million a year, right? So he's approaching that 30 a year number, which is kind of sacred for receivers. He's not there. Tyreek Hill is, I think, him and Devontae Adams, I believe, are the only two receivers up over 30 million a year. I think that's the two, right? So Waddle clearly isn't in that particular class, but he's right at the tier under that, and he's being paid as such. But a lot of people said, well, what does this do to the wide receiver market, right? There are guys like T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk and obviously Justin Jefferson looking to get paid. And, I don't really know why a guy like for me, if I'm trying to deal with Brandon Ayuk, then Jalen Waddle's contract is one of the contracts I'm looking at. Ayuk isn't on the level of a Justin Jefferson or a Tyreek Hill, or anybody of that ilk, or Devontae Adams. He's not in that stratosphere. And I get the money and how the salary cap continues to increase. And so the deals are going to increase and you're going to pass guys that you may not be better than. I understand that. But I still think there's a pecking order. And so I'm not going to pay, like, this isn't quarterback. And I'm not going to pay a receiver more than a guy until the cap actually explodes, and it hasn't done that yet, but it's going to do that here soon as they continue to add more of this TV money. But I'm not going to pay a guy like Brandon Ayuk more money than Tyreek Hill because he's not better than Tyreek Hill. Now, it's easy to do that when we're talking about on the same team, which Jalen Waddle is on the team with Tyreek Hill. He can't be making more money than Tyreek Hill. So it's easy to kind of set that bottom line like, hey, you can't make more than him, but this is what we can do for you, right? If I'm Ayuk, I'm not trying to hear that shit, right? But in my mind, I'm looking at him and I'm saying, bro, you shouldn't even be making more than Debo. How much is Debo making? That's a great question. Debo Samuel contract. He signed a 3-year, $71.5 million extension. So 71, 22 would be 66, 23 would be 69. So roughly $23.5 million a year, essentially, for that extension for Debo Samuel. Probably going to eclipse that, that's a really favorable deal when you look at the money that Waddle just got and what guys are going to get, CeeDee Lamb, what he's going to get, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a line of receivers waiting to get paid. At the top of that list is Justin Jefferson. CeeDee Lamb is probably trying to wait to see what Justin Jefferson gets. He's not better than Justin Jefferson. None of them are. He should be at the top, but you would base your money off of what Justin Jefferson gets. So if Jefferson resets the wide receiver market, and let's say he signs a deal where it's a 3-year extension, but it's $102 million. What would be 30? I'm thinking 36 million per year is probably the new number, because I think Tyreek signed one that was 33, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look at Tyreek Hill's deal. I want to say his was 33 per year for Tyreek Hill when he signed with the Dolphins. It was a 3-year 54. So he's not even at 30. He's at 27. So where's Devontae? I thought somebody was at 30. Devontae Adams contract. 5 years, 140. So that his was at 28, and then Tyreek is at 27. So nobody's at 30. So I stand corrected. So my guess is, let me check and see who is at the top. Who is currently the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL? Okay, AJ Brown, I forgot about AJ. AJ signed a 3-year 96. That's 32. Whew. All right, so 3 receivers annually make over 30 million. So I was right. I was close. I was not right. I said 2. There's 3. AJ Brown is at the top of the list. He's the highest paid NFL receiver right now at $32 million. Amon-Ra St. Brown is at 30 million, just over 30. And then Tyreek Hill is at 30 as well. Okay, so he signed a 4-year, $120 million contract extension in 2022. So he's at 30 as well. So the last 2 deals, prior to Waddle's, the last 2 extensions exceeded Tyreek Hill's. Amon-Ra St. Brown just barely, by a few 100,000, and then AJ Brown jumped over him. Well, AJ Brown was at the top. I think he got his deal right around the draft or so. Amon-Ra just got his maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But AJ Brown is the highest paid receiver in the NFL. Wow. I remember he got a massive deal and we were like, whoa, that's a lot of money. But damn, I didn't realize he was the highest paid receiver. So he's at 32. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a little over 30, and Tyreek is at 30 on the dot. So that's crazy money, right? So that's where we are at receiver. So 32 is the high mark. So to me, Justin Jefferson is going to smash whatever's at the top, which is the 32 by AJ Brown, 3 years, $96 million extension. Justin Jefferson, I'm thinking, is going to be like 36 million, maybe 35. If I'm the Vikings, 35 is a good number. He might want a little bit more than that. We'll see. Whatever he does should reset the market, and no one should pass him, which is why CeeDee Lamb and others are waiting to see what he does, because that's going to help them determine where they fall in line. Like, you don't want to, if you're CeeDee Lamb, you don't want to sign an extension for 33 million, right, per year. So let's say a 3-year 99 million, right, which makes you now the highest paid. But then Justin goes and signs one for $38 million per year. And now you saying to yourself, well, shit, I could have got right up under him at 37 or 36 and a half. And I shortchanged myself, right? So you want to wait to see what happens with Justin Jefferson, so then you can slot yourself right under him. And that's kind of what you see a lot of these receivers waiting to do. Now, in the case of a Brandon Ayuk, there's just a standoff, because the 49ers are like, we want to pay you, but we don't think you're worth what you think you're worth. T. Higgins isn't getting a long-term deal done with the Cincinnati Bengals, and CeeDee Lamb is kind of playing the waiting game. So there are a lot of receivers standing in line waiting for their cut, for their share, but it brings a larger point into focus. And I just want to reiterate, that's a really good deal for Jalen Waddle, and he's worth it. Jalen Waddle is an excellent wide receiver. He is a true number one wide receiver. If there was no Tyreek Hill, he would still be a dynamic receiver in Miami. Having Tyreek Hill beside him makes him even more of a threat. But even without Tyreek Hill, before he showed up, Waddle was already a 1,000-yard receiver. So this guy is one of the better receivers in the NFL. Good for him getting to the bag at $27 million per year. But I wanted to talk about a larger question after this deal, because there were a lot of questions about this deal after it got done for Waddle and what it would mean for some of these other receivers. But I've seen a lot of chatter on social media. One guy in particular that I'm kind of angling to try to get on my show that I would love to talk to is Bucky Brooks. And Bucky Brooks is one of these guys that I'm pretty sure you guys know. He works for the NFL Network, former NFL player back in the mid-90s, played the wide receiver position, and he's an analyst for NFL Network, does a really good job with the draft and the coverage there. And so he had a pretty interesting take. And I've seen others with this take as well, but he's been one of the guys that I've seen kind of pushing this narrative a little bit more of late. And he seems to be one of the louder ones. So his stance is teams are going to start taking a look at the receiver position. And I told you this conversation has tentacles that extend to other conversations that are indirectly affected by this conversation. So we start talking about wide receiver money. It's getting a little bit out of control, but reeling it in, how do you do that? For me, so I was having a great conversation with my buddy the other day, former scout as well. You're right, E. Bucky Brooks was a former scout as well, similar to Daniel Jeremiah, right? So me and my buddy were having this conversation about the wide receiver position and its importance in the pecking order of positions in the NFL. And I told him my stance on the receiver position is I don't consider receiver a premium position. It's paid as a premium position, but I don't consider it premium in my estimate. If I were a general manager, you'd have to be a Justin Jefferson type to get paid by me personally. If you weren't willing to come to the table with reasonable expectations, like you can't be Brandon Ayuk and expect to be paid Justin Jefferson type money. You've been a really good receiver for me. You haven't been great. You're a really good receiver. Justin Jefferson hasn't had, this is his first season because of injuries. This is his first season having less than 1,400 yards. Keep that in mind. Like Justin Jefferson is a machine. Dudes like that get paid. Jamar Chase is a machine. Those kind of guys should get top dollar. Tyreek Hill is a machine. Okay. If they're healthy, they're dealing. Okay. Those guys get paid. When Stephon Diggs was in his bag, he was a machine. Those guys get paid. DeAndre Hopkins, when he was in his prime, machine. I'm paying those guys. That's when it's a premium. But guys that are really solid, I'm not paying them over the top money. Like what Amon-Ra St. Brown just got, like, let me look at it. And look, Amon-Ra had like 2 million catches last year. I'm fully aware of what he brings to the table, but I'm gonna guess that the yardage just isn't there. Like he's not a deep threat. Like if I'm paying you big money, you got to take the top off the defense. At moment's notice, it could be an 82-yard touchdown, messing around with this receiver. That's not Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now he's a chain mover. He makes all the tough catches. He's physical. He's a tone setter. I'm glad he got paid, but I don't. I don't know if I would have paid him the kind of money that over $30 million. So his first season, 90 catches, 912 yards. His second season, 106 catches, 1,161 yards. 5 touchdowns in his first season, 6 touchdowns in his second season. And then 119 catches, which was ridiculous last year. 1,515 yards and 10 touchdowns. Those are some pretty gaudy numbers. So if this trend continues, then I'd have to eat my words because those are big numbers. And I knew he posted big numbers last year. I'm fully aware. But I'd need to see it again because, again, the 1,515 yards last year, ridiculous. Is that going to be the high watermark for his career? Is he not going to come close to that again? Like, I needed to see that one more time. Like, if I'm going to pay you, like the Giants just paid, Brian Burns ridiculous money for a guy that hasn't shown you that he's consistently posting ridiculous numbers, like a TJ Watt, an Aaron Donald, or a Daniil Hunter, or one of these guys that has shown you, hey, I can get you 15 sacks multiple years. Trey Hendrickson. These guys have put up numbers. Myles Garrett. You pay guys like that. For me, a premium, these are the premium positions in no particular order. Quarterback, tackle, edge rusher, corner. Those are the 4 premium positions. I'm not paying anybody else premium money unless you are an absolute all-pro stud. You're not getting the kind of money that's going to reset the market from me if I were a GM. Those are the 4 positions I'm willing to pay that kind of money to. Quarterback, tackle, corner, edge rusher. Those 4 positions affect the game more than any other position in all of pro football. Quarterback touches the football on just about every single snap. You win and lose games based on how well your quarterback plays. You got to protect that quarterback, so your tackles are very, very important. Edge rushers affect the game. They affect the quarterback. They affect the tackles, so you pay them big money. And there's a chicken or the egg complex that we have conversations about. Analytics people love corners more than they love edge rushers. Purists like myself prefer the edge rusher over the corner. I get the argument that the analytics people have, which is corners can take the best receiver out of a game, right? You can't run from the best corner on the other teams, on the other side of the field. If that team says he's a star corner and wherever your best receiver goes, my best corner is going to follow and shadow him, I can completely erase your best player with one guy. Whereas if you're an edge rusher and the team decides he's not going to affect this game, we're going to double and triple team him, you can take an edge rusher out of the game. Now, you're going to have to alter your game plan to do it. So he's still affecting the game, but he's not wrecking the game. There's a difference. He's affecting the game because instead of you having 5 eligibles out in the pass route, because you got a double team or you got a chip, you've only got 4, or sometimes you've only got 3 out. So you've got to alter what you do schematically to adjust to this guy so that he doesn't wreck the game. However, you can stop him and neutralize him by putting 2 or 3 bodies on him. Meanwhile, that corner, I don't care what you do, you can't get rid of him. If he's that dude, like Darrelle Revis in his prime, you can take Darrelle Revis and say, all right, Justin Jefferson, we're putting the shackles on his ass today. All right, it's Mary time. And no, we're not taking the shackles off his feet so he can dance. We're not going to let him praise nobody today. He's going to be locked up like Akon, right? Convict. You can take a cornerback and do that. And that's what the analytics people say. Hey, give me the corner because I know he can impact the game no matter what. I get it. So for me, those are the 4 positions, right? Receiver is not, and so here's another conversation that spawns off of this, right? So here's another conversation that spawns off of this. If you take a look at the Super Bowl winning teams, and this is a conversation that's been happening for a very long time. Look at the teams that win the Super Bowl. How many of them have elite wide receivers? And usually the answer is not many, right? Like the last team that had an elite receiver to win the Super Bowl was the Chiefs with Tyreek Hill. How many years ago was that? Like Tyreek Hill hasn't been a part of the last 2 Super Bowl victories in Kansas City. So they won it these last 2 years. They didn't win it the year before that. and they didn't win it the year before that. So it was they won it in 20. No, it had to be 19. Brady won it in 20, and then in 21, the Rams won it, and then they won it in 22 and 23. So it had to be 19 was the last time an elite receiver won a Super Bowl, right? And then before that, it's anybody's guess the last time a elite receiver, because you had all those Patriots Super Bowls. They never had an elite receiver. The best receiver Tom Brady ever had in his career was Randy Moss, and they didn't win the Super Bowl that year. If you recall, that was 07 with the perfect season until the Giants blew that up, right? So you got a bunch of Patriots Super Bowls in there. You got the now, that's not to say that elite receivers haven't been in the Super Bowl. They just don't ultimately win it. Let's see who else won Super Bowls in that stretch. The Broncos won one in 15. The offense was awful that year with Peyton Manning. Let's see. Let's just go in order, right? So 19 was the Chiefs, 18 was the Patriots, 17 was the Eagles. They didn't have an elite receiver. Alshon Jeffrey, I think, was the best receiver on that 17 Eagles roster. 16 was the Patriots. That was the Falcons year, if I'm not mistaken. So you see where I'm doing. You see where I'm going with this, right? Well, who was 15 was the Broncos. 14 was who was 14? Now I'm going back a ways. I know it wasn't the Patriots, because the Patriots, until they won the Super Bowl in 16, they hadn't won it in like 7 years or so. It had been a long time. So it wasn't them. It was that the Packers? Steelers? No, they were closer to 2010, 2011, somewhere in that neighborhood. I don't know why I can't think of who won the Super Bowl in 2014. But anyway, I digress. You got to go back a ways to find an elite receiver that helped this team win a Super Bowl. Like they're so infrequent. It begs the question, do you need an elite receiver to win a Super Bowl? And Bucky Brooks' stance on this is, no, you don't. And he said the Chiefs just proved it, right? They've just proven it again. And you're seeing teams kind of take this approach. The Packers have taken that approach. They moved on from Devontae Adams. He wanted too much money. And they've taken this wide receiver by committee type of approach. The Chiefs, just won the Super Bowl. And my rebuttal to that is, the Chiefs didn't win the Super Bowl because of their offense. They won it because of their defense. Had they not had the most dominant defense that Mahomes has had in his career, they don't win the Super Bowl. They don't even make the Super Bowl without their defense. The offense was along for the ride. Even in the Super Bowl, the offense wasn't very good. It was really the defense that kind of spurred their win. If not for their defense shutting down the 49ers in that game and really giving the offense a chance to get their shit together, they don't win that Super Bowl. So I beg to differ. I think you do need a quality receiver. Like, they had nothing at receiver. Like, if Rashid Rice is your best receiver, you're in trouble. Like, you shouldn't win a Super Bowl with Rashid Rice being your best receiver. But that's what they were able to do because their defense was so good. And they have Patrick Mahomes. That's another thing, is you can sit here and tell me, oh, you know, but Bucky Brooks, to his defense, said you got to have an A-plus quarterback. Like, you can't just throw any Joe Schmo out there and think you're going to put random receivers and get the results that the Chiefs just got. You got to have an A-plus quarterback to make it work. Like, we're going to put the Bills to the test this year because now they don't have a true number one. We'll see what Keon Coleman ends up being for them. But they got a smorgasbord group of receivers. They don't even have Gabe Davis anymore. And I get it. Bills fans will, crucify me for even bringing his name up as if he's a difference maker. But they're really lacking at the receiver position. We're going to find out how good Josh Allen is this year because you can't expect Keon Coleman to come in here and just, jump into the number one wide receiver role seamlessly as if nothing ever happened and there was never a such thing as Stephon Diggs in Buffalo. So I'm anxious to see what that looks like. people are, giving the Packers a lot of praise for what they've done. We'll see if they can continue to keep that train going or not, because I do think you need to have some good receivers to get you where you ultimately want to go. But the thing is, you don't have to have elite receivers to win the Super Bowl. And so Bucky Brooks's point is, you're going to start seeing a lot of teams make conscious decisions to not pay receivers the kind of money that you're going to see Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb and some of these big time receivers get, right? They're going to bypass those guys. Like, if they can't get to a reasonable contract, they're going to trade that player, use that draft capital to acquire a receiver in the draft, and they're going to keep going about it like that, sort of like the running back position. Now, it won't be as, frugal and penny pinching like the running back position, where these guys aren't even being paid reasonable money for their, talents, right? Like, guys are fighting over $8 million a year, which is ridiculous for, a position that takes the pounding and is as impactful as running back can be, especially as the weather changes and gets colder. You need to be able to hand the football off. The fact that these guys take the type of pounding that they do and are paid the least amount of money on offense. Even tight ends, really good tight ends, are paid more money than running backs, which is crazy. But I digress. Bucky Brooks suggests that you could see a situation where the receiver position becomes devalued somewhat like running back. Now, I vehemently disagree, because even Derrick Henry, who was the most dominant running back we've seen over the last 7 years, right? King Henry rushed for over 2,000 yards, was the rush leader multiple times over that 7-year stretch, was the best running back in football. There's no, like, he put the Tennessee Titans on his back in 2019, and they rode him all the way to the AFC Championship with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. Like, what are we talking about? This man was making chump change at the running back position, despite doing all of that, right? So it'll never be that. It'll never be that. The receiver position will never be that. But I do think because the NFL is a copycat league, and if we do see some of these teams have the success that the Chiefs just had, if, say, Green Bay wins the Super Bowl this upcoming season with the group of receivers that they currently have, with Jordan Love, who would have to be playing out of his gourd for that to happen. But let's just say they win the Super Bowl. That's 2 years in a row that a team with, you could argue, not having a definitive number one wide receiver won the Super Bowl. And let's say that they played Buffalo in the Super Bowl, and Buffalo clearly doesn't have it. And if they make it to the Super Bowl, maybe somebody established themselves. Maybe Keon Coleman established himself in his rookie season as a stud number one wide receiver. But let's just say that he didn't. Let's just say he was solid, and Curtis Samuel was solid, and Khalil Shakir was solid, and all of the receivers were solid, but they really leaned on those tight ends. Boy, do they have some an abundance of riches at the tight end position, and boy, did they have some stuff at running back. And let's say they leaned on all of that stuff, and it helped them get to the Super Bowl, but they didn't have a definitive number one. You're going to see teams say, you know what? The Bills traded away Stephon Diggs, and they made it to the Super Bowl. The Packers aren't even paying any of their receivers. They're all rookies. They're all on rookie contracts. They're not even paying a receiver right now, and they made it to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl the year before, and they had Rashid Rice as their best receiver. They had guys that couldn't even catch. Valdez Scantling couldn't catch claps in a whorehouse, as a wise man used to say. And they won the Super Bowl. You're going to have teams looking around and saying, what are we doing right now? Why are we paying all of this money to a position that isn't impacting the game as much as we think it is? Because you look at a team like the Dolphins, look how much they have invested at the receiver position. With Tua at quarterback, I still don't see them making it out of the first round. They got two receivers making over $27 million per year. That's $57 million per season tied up two players at the same position. And you can't get out of the first round. Look at the Philadelphia Eagles. They just paid Devontae Smith some good money. What does his contract look like? Let's see what his contract looks like. And again, another guy that deserves the money, by the way. He's really, really good. 3 years, $75 million. So $25 million per year for him, 32 for AJ Brown. So another team with $57 million invested in their top two receivers. So the Dolphins have $57 million invested in their two receivers, and the Eagles have $57 million invested in their top two receivers. Now, the Eagles did make it to a Super Bowl with those guys. And so they do have that on their resume. And they've seen that, hey, with these two playing at a very high level, they are capable of taking us all the way to the chip. They didn't win it, but they got there. So at least they can make the case that there is validity to the money that they're spending. Like, we've got tangible proof that these two guys are capable of taking us where we want to ultimately go. The Dolphins have no such proof, but they're spending that kind of money, right? And the Bengals are in a similar situation, which is why they can't pay T. Higgins, because they know they got to pay Jamar Chase next year. I can't pay you, bro, because if I pay you, then I got to turn around and pay Jamar Chase, and his deal has got to smoke your deal. It's got to blow your deal out of the water. I just paid Joe Burrow. I can't. Trey Hendrickson wants more money. Like, the Bengals, their hands are tied, right? Because they got to protect Joe Burrow, because they don't want what happened to him in his rookie season to happen to him again. Last year, he didn't finish the season, so they got to protect him. So they're spending money on the offensive line. They spent money in free agency. They got to pay Jamar Chase. I can't pay you, T. Sorry, bro. I want to, but I can't, right? So teams have to make a decision. Like the Vikings, they made their decision when they told Kirk Cousins. The reason they told Kirk Cousins, like, we would love to have you back, but I'm gonna have to draft this quarterback, though. You know why? Because I can't afford to keep paying you top dollar when I got to pay Justin Jefferson this massive deal. I got to start taking, like, they just let Danielle Hunter walk. They couldn't afford him. Now, I mean, it made a lot of sense to let Danielle Hunter walk. The Vikings aren't going to win anything tangible here in the near future. And signing a 30-year-old pass rusher to big money when you're not in the position to win doesn't make a ton of sense. But even if they wanted him back, they couldn't afford it, because you got to pay Justin Jefferson. You know, the offensive line, I think they got to pay their left tackle here shortly if they haven't already paid the Virginia Tech tackle already. He's really good. So you got to start thinking about that. They had money tied up in a lot of veterans for a number of years. They finally started to get all those guys off the books. But when you look at the situation, you got to start looking at the future and understanding, hey, here's what the situation is. And the receiver position is an interesting one, because I feel like receiver is one of those positions that if you have a really good player at that position, he can help your football team immensely. But the biggest issue with receiver is when you get to the playoffs, is that guy going to continue to be as effective as he's been throughout the regular season? You know, it's a lot colder. You know, you run into better teams, so the level of opponents have increased. Now you see better corners that may be able to take away some of the stuff that you were getting away with in the regular season, right? And so now that's why you see a lot of these teams with elite receivers not advancing in the postseason. It's a team sport, obviously, and there's only so much, but it's rare to see an elite receiver go on the run that Larry Fitzgerald went on back in 2008, when he literally put the Arizona Cardinals on his back and took them to the Super Bowl. and tried to win them that. If you remember Larry Fitzgerald in the Super Bowl versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, he single-handedly tried to win them a Lombardi. He willed them to the lead late in the game, and Ben Roethlisberger went on that amazing drive and had that crazy throw to Santonio Holmes for the touchdown, the game-winning score, right? Larry Fitzgerald did everything in his power, including, trying to chase down James Harrison on that interception, right? Remember, he ran him all the way down to the 1 yard line and tackled him, but he took him into the end zone and it ended up being a touchdown. But Larry did everything. Caught slants, ran for touchdowns, caught deep balls, ran for he did everything. Still wasn't enough. But that's rare. You rarely see receivers take over games in the postseason. They'll take over a game in the regular season because you're not seeing the same caliber of opponents. Generally, you get to the playoffs, you get to the championship game, you get to the Super Bowl. These are elite corners you're playing against now. The reason that these teams are still available, still left, is because they have elite defenders. So now, is that elite receiver going to still get off? Why did you think Randy Moss, who turned in one of the greatest receiving seasons and helped the Patriots set all kinds of offensive records, how come they only scored 17 points in that game? Remember Brady laughed when I think they scored 14 points, if I'm not mistaken. It was either 17 or 14. And I remember somebody predicted before the game that the Giants would win, 17 to 14 or 20 to 14. And Brady said, we're only going to score 14 points. And then they only scored like 14 or 17 points, whatever it was. Because that pass rush got on his ass. That's why, right? That pass rush got on his ass, and he didn't have time to let those long developing routes happen down the field. Because you're seeing better quality defenses as you get into the playoffs. I still think you need good receivers, though. Like, you can't be void of receivers because you don't have Patrick Mahomes. And if you don't have a Patrick Mahomes, even with Mahomes last year and that subpar group, they needed arguably the best defense in football to win the Super Bowl. Without it, they don't win. Why do you think if this was sustainable, Mahomes not having receivers was sustainable, why do you think, then why did they go out and get Hollywood Brown and double down and go get Xavier Worthy in the draft? Why did they do that? You know why they did that? Because the shit isn't sustainable. Having no receivers, not having guys you can rely on is not sustainable. You have to have guys. And I'm not advocating for not having guys. What I'm advocating for, or what I'm saying is, when you see a guy playing really good football, but you know you're not going to pay him, you got to get something for him. And then you got to replace him. You got to replenish it if you're going to go that route. Like, if a guy's really good, he's a 1,000-yard receiver, he's 1,100-yard receiver, and he wants ridiculous money. He's really good. If he's willing to settle for really good money, I'll pay it to him. If he thinks he's top of the market type of receiver, but you're putting up solid statistical numbers, we're at an impasse. There's a disconnect. And if that's the case, I'm going to have to move you, right? That's kind of how I feel. Like, I'll give you an example as a Commanders fan. Terry McLaurin, I don't think he's had a 1,200-yard receiving season in his career. And Commanders fans will always go to bat for Terry, and they'll talk about the lack of quarterback play and the lack of consistency offensively from a play calling standpoint, X, Y, Z, et cetera, et cetera. I hear all of that. But I've seen elite receivers still put up big-time numbers with various play callers, with various quarterbacks. I watched the elites do it. I watched Larry Fitzgerald do it. I watched Josh Gordon put up numbers with trash quarterbacks and lead the league in receiving with trash quarterbacks, right? So really don't want to hear the shit at the end of the day. Like, Terry's really good, but he's not elite, and I've made that abundantly clear. So I wouldn't pay Terry McLaurin elite money, but Terry McLaurin, at the time, he signed for really good money, but it wasn't elite. It wasn't set the market money. I'm willing to pay a guy that's a great leader in the locker room, a tone setter. I know I can count on him to play every single week. I know that this guy is going to give me 1,000 yards. I'm willing to pay him for that, right? For being all of that. I'm willing to pay him good money. I'm not willing to pay him top of the market money, though. And that's where the disconnect comes. Like Brandon Ayuk, I'm not willing to pay you. Let's look at Brandon Ayuk's money. Let's look at Brandon Ayuk's statistics, rather. And I know he had a really good year this year. He had a really good year this year. So first year of his career, 60 catches, 748 yards, 5 touchdowns. Second year of his career, 56 catches, 826 yards, 5 touchdowns. Third year of his career, 78 catches. His first 1,000-yard season came in year 3, 1,015 yards, 8 touchdowns. This year, 75 catches, 1,342 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Those are good numbers. And the 1,300 yard, and in his mind, I'm ascending as a receiver. I'm going into the prime. You're paying me for what I'm about to do, not what I've already done. I'm showing you that I'm going on this upward trajectory. And next year is 1,400 or 1,500. And the year after that is another 14, 15. And another year after that is 14, 15. And then I might start to hit my decline. But that's what you're paying for. You're paying for these next 3 years of this top level football. I expect to be one of the league's best. I need to be paid as such. If you're the 49ers and you can project that and you think that's what he's going to be, then you pay him. If you're not sure, if you think he may regress to the mean and next year might be 1,142 yards and 6 touchdowns, I can't pay you $31 million per year for 1,136 yards. I can't do that, right? If I'm paying you Justin Jefferson money, I need Justin Jefferson production. And that's where the disconnect comes in, right? And it's a tough business because you want to reward players in your locker room who have done it the right way, who have done everything you've asked. They've played through injuries. They've been a model citizen in the locker room, a great teammate. In certain cases, they've been leaders. You want to reward those guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? You want to reward him. And he's put up big numbers already, especially from a catch perspective. And then it finally turned into yardage, right? It finally manifested itself into yards. So now you can validate, all right, I should pay him because it finally all came together. He's had catches before, he just didn't have the yardage. Last year, it all came together. So it's a really interesting, dilemma and discussion. I don't ever see the receiver position ending up like running back because there's just too many good receivers. But that's another question, right? There's so many good receivers. Do you need great to win? If you can get by with good, and I think you can. We've seen A+ quarterbacks get by. Really, that's what you need is the A+ quarterback. And if you surround him with plus receivers, not A++, just plus receivers, good receivers, you can win a Super Bowl. Like Hines Ward was really good. He wasn't elite, but he was good. And you could win with Hines Ward, right? And Julian Edelman, he wasn't elite, but he was good. And when the playoffs came, there weren't many better than him, but he wasn't elite, but he was good. And when the lights were its brightest, he played his best football, right? But he wasn't elite. And Brady won a lot of Super Bowls with guys like Danny Amendola and Julian Edelman because it's Tom Brady, right? Ben Roethlisberger won Super Bowl. Santonio Holmes, really good receiver. He was never better than Antonio Brown. None of those receivers were ever better than Antonio Brown. But they won Super Bowls, right? Or they made it to the Super Bowl. They won a Super Bowl and made it to another one, right? So, again, you can win a Super Bowl without an elite receiver. I think having an elite receiver helps the path to the Super Bowl be easier. Like for me, elite receivers show up in the regular season because you're not going to see elite corners or really good corners. There are only a handful of top-notch corners in the league at a time. There's not going to be 12 guys that are shut down corners. There might be 3 or 4 that are like literally elite corners that they may not erase elite receivers, but they're going to make it tough on them. They're not going to be putting up the numbers that they put up on a weekly basis. But The rest of those guys that we consider, like Jair Alexander, has been talked about as an elite corner for like 4 years. Jair Alexander is mid, right? But yet he gets this label as this elite corner. For what? I don't know, because he gets cooked on a weekly basis. Now, he's not afraid. Doesn't matter. He's still getting his ass cooked. So there are only a handful of guys that they do this week in and week out. And so an elite receiver is going to cook most corners in the league, put up massive numbers. You get to the playoffs, you start seeing these other elite defensive backs now, and shit changes. And elite pass rushers and pass rushes and coordinators that know how to dial it up and slow you down, and good linebacker play and all of that stuff. It all goes hand in hand. But I think it's a fascinating discussion because elite receivers generally don't win Super Bowls. You're seeing these receiver numbers go through the roof. You're seeing guys get paid. And again, I don't have a problem paying the upper echelon, the upper crust of the receiver position. I don't mind paying them the kind of money that they deserve. I don't mind paying a Justin Jefferson. I don't mind paying a Jamar Chase. I don't mind paying CeeDee Lamb, because these are the guys that I know are going to put up those kinds of numbers. They're going to produce at a high level. I'm not worried about the production. Okay? Not worried about it. It's the guys that I'm not 100% sure about. Like, I don't think T. Higgins wants massive money. I think he just wants to be paid good money. And the Bengals are like, bro, we can't afford to even pay you good money. Like, you could probably get a deal done with T. Higgins for $26 million per year, which is probably where he should be. He's not better than Jalen Waddle, who just got 27 and some change. But he's probably a step under him. So him making $25 million a year would make sense. But the Bengals are like, bro, we can't pay you 25 because we about to pay Jamar Chase 35, 36. We can't pay you that money. That's over $60 million invested in one position. Not to mention we paying Joe Burrow all this money. We spending money on the offensive line. Trey Hendrickson wants a new deal. Right? Like, we got money all over the place. We can't pay you that, bro. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the receiver position. And honestly, we can sit here and have these kind of discussions and this kind of conversation, but what's ultimately going to steer that conversation or that narrative in a direction is results. And that's why I said, watching teams like Green Bay, watching teams like Buffalo this year with, their receiver position being sort of in this weird space, right, where they're just kind of caught in limbo right now. Really don't know what to expect from that group. It's going to be interesting to see how, if the Bills have a massive decline this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happened, because they were on the verge of having it happen last year. They were on the verge of a collapse. They were 6-6 and really on the outside looking in of the postseason. They had to win their final 5 games to make the playoffs and ultimately won their division. But they had to win every single one. Any loss in those 5 games, and they would have not only not won their division, they would have been eliminated from playoff contention. They had to win every single game, and they did. And so I could see them kind of flaming out here. But we'll see what Josh Allen is all about, right? We'll see what he's all about, because he's going to have to, he's going to have to make his money this year, without a doubt. And we'll see what Jordan Love does. Like, caught the league, I think, a little off guard, right? Caught the league with his pants down. People weren't paying attention to the Packers. And he snuck up on a lot of people last year. Now we're paying attention. Now let's see if those receivers are able to run it back and do it again and be just as prolific as they were at times last season, right? We're going to see how some of these teams that don't have a true number one wide receiver, how they perform. I think it's tough to win in this league without, again, it's levels to this. I think you need a number one wide receiver to win and win big in the NFL. But there are varying degrees of number one wide receivers. Right. So again, do you need the upper crust or do you just need a middle of the pack number one? Do you need a lower level? Can you get away with a lower level one? Yeah, absolutely you can. For sure, you can do that. Honestly, that's probably your best route, is to not have a Justin Jefferson where you know you're going to have to pay this astronomical amount of money. You want that kind of production. You want that kind of beast at receiver. But at some point, you got to feed that beast too, right? You got to pay that guy. And you know that's coming. And when you're paying your quarterback and you're paying that receiver that kind of money, it really hinders what you can do with the rest of your route, which is, you go back to the Bucky Brooks conversation, right? You're paying this big time quarterback all this money because he's supposed to be able to, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? So he's supposed to be able to lift the rest of these receivers and elevate their game. If he's that guy, if you're paying him $500 million as a quarterback, he's supposed to be able to take whatever you give him and make it work. It's still tough. You still need guys that can play ball and get it done. But it's becoming increasingly harder to pay that quarterback and pay a receiver and get some of the other guys done. Like, you got to pick your spots. Like, it's much better. Like, the Chiefs have a great formula because you got an elite tight end. Tight end doesn't cost you nearly as much as a receiver does. So you can pay him big money, still pay Chris Jones. They couldn't pay the corner, right? They had to move on from L'Jarius Sneed because he's making too much. He's going to make too much money. You got to pick your spots. That's an elite position. They wanted to keep him, but it was too much money because they're paying the offensive line. They lost a Super Bowl because their offensive line wasn't good enough. So what did they do? They've been investing in the offensive line ever since. So if you're investing in the offensive line, and we've seen what Chris Jones has done, you got to pay him massive money. You paid Patrick Mahomes. You're paying Travis Kelce. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much money. And they know we can't pay L'Jarius Sneed because we're going to have to pay the nickel corner from UW, Trent McDuffie. We're going to have to pay him soon. Like, we can't let him walk. He's an animal, right? Got to pay Trent McDuffie. So L'Jarius Sneed can walk so we can pay Trent McDuffie in a couple years, right? Like, you got to pick your spots. So receiver makes it a lot tougher to pick your spots when you got one of those guys. You much rather have a beast tight end and supplement those, the rest of the supporting cast, have them be solid receivers, right? One of them can be like really good. Like, they were able to win a Super Bowl with Juju Smith-Schuster. You can do that. You can do that with Juju Smith-Schuster as your number one when you have Travis Kelce. You can do that. He's good enough, or was at that time. Good enough. That's the kind of receiver you can get away with. But it's a great discussion to have. I love talking about receivers and the impact that they have on games, but it's definitely one to keep an eye on because teams with elite receivers generally don't win anything. Calvin Johnson was the best receiver in football. They never made it out of the first round of the playoffs. And again, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't Matthew Stafford's fault. They didn't have a defense in those years, right? They little to no run game, but it still doesn't change the fact that they didn't win. This man had almost 2,000 yards receiving in a single season, and they won like 5 games that year. So again, you can have an elite receiver, but it doesn't really do you much good if the team isn't very good. And it's hard to build a great team around a quarterback that's making top dollar and a receiver also making top of the market money at his position. It makes it hard to build unless you're drafting your ass off. And those guys, you got to stagger it. You got to get lucky. You got to be, I don't even want to call it luck because you have to have the foresight to see that you got to stagger this. You don't want to be in a position where you got a beast edge rusher and a beast receiver coming up on a contract at the same time. That's tough. Now, you may get one of those deals done and you may have to use the franchise tag on the other so you can stagger them, right? So while this guy is getting, X amount of dollars in that second year of that extension, now this guy can finally get his extension and you can have that cap number be a lot lower. And so this guy's making a ton of money in year one. And so, right, because you can't have both of them getting that deal, that new deal in the same year, because that next year, both of their contracts may balloon to this ridiculous number, and now you're in trouble, right? So again, you got to pick your spots. Like the Detroit Lions, the beauty in what they were able to do just now is they weren't paying anybody real money, right? Similar to, I'm a Commanders fan. We're not paying anybody any real money. Like we have 3 contracts of over 20 million, and then nobody else is making $10 million, right? You got Terry McLaurin, Deron Payne, and Jonathan Allen in that order, making the most money on the team. It's like 24, 22, and then like 20 or something like that, I believe. And then nobody else is making, the next highest guy is making $9 million a year. Like nobody's making any big money. So the Lions were in a similar position. They weren't paying a quarterback at the time. They weren't paying any big time receivers. They weren't paying any edge rushers. They weren't paying any corners. They weren't paying any premium position, no tackles. I think they were paying Taylor Decker. That was it. They weren't paying anybody any real money. So you know what they could do? They could re-sign Penei Sewell to this massive deal. They could re-sign Jared Goff to this massive deal. They could re-sign Amon-Ra St. Brown to this massive deal and take care of their core. Why? Because they weren't paying anybody big money. So they had all this money to spend. And now, by the time they have to pay Aiden Hutchinson, all of those contracts will be getting to the point where they can either redo them or they're coming off the books, because you got to be able to stagger this stuff. You know what I'm saying? So again, you can pay a big time receiver and a quarterback if you're not paying a lot of guys, but it gets tough when you got a lot of talent and you got to spread the money around. It gets a lot tougher if you're paying a receiver elite, top of the market money, right? It gets a lot tougher if you're paying a quarterback and a receiver, and then you got to try to spread it around to other positions. The Lions don't have, like, they're a really good roster. They got a lot of good football players. They don't have a lot of elite players, though. They don't have an elite corner that they have to pay big money to. They went out in free agency, looked around and said, oh, we're good. They drafted 2 corners. So they're not paying those corners any real money. They're hoping that they hit a home run with those guys, or at least one of them, but they're not paying any corners. They're not paying any edge rushers because Aiden Hutchinson is only going into year 3, right? So they still got another year or 2 before they got to pay Aiden Hutchinson. There's nobody else to pay, right? They don't have any more big contracts coming down the pipeline. So they're good. They knew they could pay Penei Sewell. They knew they could pay Jared Goff. They knew they could pay Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're good. It starts to hit you when you're the Chiefs and you pay Mahomes and you're paying a guard a whole bunch of money and you're paying a tackle a whole bunch of money and you're paying Chris Jones a bunch of money. And then L'Jarius Sneed is like, yo, you got something for me? And they're like, nah, we just got it. We just gave Travis Kelce a 2-year extension with big money. Yeah, we don't have any for you, bro, because Trent McDuffie's coming up here shortly. And we got to think about these linebackers, too, that we're going to have to pay. Like, when you got a lot of talent and you got to spread the money out, you got to pick and choose. Can't pay everybody. Anyway, I digress. Like I said, fun topic. I could do this all day long. I could do this all night long, all night. Oh, all night long, all night. But I'm not gonna do it all night because I told you I wasn't gonna keep you here all night. So, with that said, let's get to our next segment, and that's social media maneuvers. I'm a midnight marauder. Y'all know what it is. Speaking of midnight, it's literally midnight on the dot on the East Coast. So we are definitely, figuratively and literally, midnight marauders. Y'all know what to do. If you haven't already done so, use the hashtag LouieTeeNetwork to have your comment read on the air if it is pertinent. We will get to as many of those as we can. But if you want to ensure that your comment is read, use the super chat function. If you are a member of the MOBB, you can use your comment function to allow you to make a comment. So we will get to as many comments as we can, and we'll get out of here. So let's get to the comment section, knock down these comments real quick, and then we'll get to the comment section, see if we knock down a few comments, and then we'll move on. John Perez, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. My guy, JP, writes, Lou, I'm going to be honest. I have very little hope for my Lakers next year unless we make a major move to get us over the top. Yeah, I mean, so here's the problem. LeBron's old. He's still your best player. AD is really good, but he's inconsistent. You don't know which one's going to show up. And even when he does show up, he has to be your best player. And there are too many instances where he's not, where it's still LeBron. And that can't happen. And then you got to have a consistent third scorer, and you don't. One night it's D'Lo. The next night it's Austin Reeves. Then the next night it's none of them, right? You can't have that inconsistent nature. You got to have consistency, and the Lakers lack that. You had a ton of injuries too. Like, you really didn't have a bad roster this year. You just had a lot of unfortunate injuries. Like Vincent, didn't give you much of anything because he was banged up. Jared Vanderbilt got injured, and that really hurt you, especially defensively. You just dealt with a bunch of injuries this year too. So that really hurt you, but guys just didn't step up, right? D'Lo was inconsistent. He's probably played his way out of LA more likely than not. Austin Reeves was a disappointment at times. He was still really good, but he's for all that he is on offense, he's a bit of a defensive liability. So he's got to perform on offense. If I'm gonna take the defensive liability that you are, I need you to make it worth my while by producing offensively. And again, he did that at times, but just not consistently, right? So I don't know if there's a major move for your Lakers to make, to be honest with you. Their priority is to bring back LeBron. So if you do that, LeBron's not taking a pay cut. Last time I checked, LeBron's trying to become a billionaire. So LeBron's not taking a pay cut. He's trying to make every single red cent that he can. So you're going to have to figure it out on your own. And I just don't know how many more moves and what more flexibility that you have, right? JP, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Double up. Thank you for doubling up. My guy, JP, right? He says, can we talk about the Cowboys and Jets for a second? I feel like both of those teams are in win or you're fired seasons. I don't know about the Jets and Robert Saleh. It feels like he's been somewhat snake bitten in his 3 year, what is this, year 4 for him, I believe, in New York. The first year, he didn't really have a quarterback. The defense was elite. Year 2, they drafted Zach Wilson. So how long has he been? It's got to be like year 5 for him. Because the first year, they didn't have any quarterback. It was bad. Second year, they drafted Zach Wilson. He wasn't very good. Year 3, Zach Wilson again wasn't very good. Then year 4, got Aaron Rodgers. He gets hurt. So now I think we're going into year 5 of Robert Saleh. And it feels like they need some results here, but he also, it's the thing, like, this is how I feel about coaches. Yes, you need results. This is a results-based business. So results above all else is what's ultimately going to keep you employed as a head coach. However, I tend to look at it from this lens. As a coach, you get a job based off of being really good on one side of the ball or the other. In the case of a special teams coach like a John Harbaugh, he was really good on special teams, but he was really good just as a coach in general, right? That's rare. We don't see a lot of special teams coaches get hired to be head coaches in the NFL. It's usually because you're a dominant defensive coordinator or a dominant offensive coordinator. Robert Saleh was a dominant defensive coordinator, and the Jets defense, every single season he's been there, has been lights out. So it's not because he hasn't done the thing that he was brought there to do in terms of having that defense. They knew that they were going to have to fix the offense, and that's why they drafted Zach Wilson. Clearly, it did not work. They surrounded him with talent. They surrounded Aaron Rodgers with talent. When they got Rodgers, gave him a bunch of weapons, and he got hurt. So he's been a bit snake bitten. This year it is a big year because if Rodgers stays healthy and it doesn't work, then you could see heads roll potentially. If the defense is really good and then Rodgers just gets old on us overnight, that's a tough spot for Robert Saleh to be in, because again, the thing that he was brought there to do, obviously he was brought there to coach the entire team and to win. But there's nothing worse than getting an offensive coordinator. Like a great example was Brandon Staley with the Chargers. His calling card was defense. That's why he got the Chargers job. And his defense was ass. Like, if you can't do the one thing that I brought you there to do, like you're calling the plays and the defense stinks. I've given you all the resources you've needed. Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. We drafted the linebacker out of Oklahoma. We got the safety, Derwin James. We've given you, the corner, Asante Samuel. Like, we've given you all that you needed. Drew Tranquil at one point was there, and you had all these weapons, and you weren't able to get it done. Like, that's when I think it gets to the grounds of, all right, you need to be terminated. Right? We got to move on. That hasn't happened with Robert Saleh. But yes, to your point, he needs to win. And, I can sit there and make all the excuses in the world, but at the end of the day, you got to find a way to get it done. It's tough, though, when you see how well the defense is playing. And remember, he went on that rant after they beat Philadelphia last year. And he talked about all the elite quarterbacks. And he said, look at what we did to all of them. Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and at that time, Jalen Hurts. The only guy that really carved him up was Dak Prescott. But they went through the gamut early in the season, and they shut down just about every single one of those quarterbacks. The problem was they just couldn't score enough points because they didn't have anybody at quarterback. So it's tough, man. If Rodgers is healthy, they expect results. So do I and everyone else. And that'll be the key. If Rodgers is healthy and he doesn't win, yeah, he could get fired. As far as the Cowboys are concerned, that's a no-brainer. Like, it's crazy that I even said that because Mike McCarthy's gone 12-5 3 years in a row. Like, I get it, but it's no longer about the regular season. Like, we know you can be a good regular season coach. Can you win in the playoffs or not? That's what it all boils down to. You were the first team in NFL history to lose to a 7 seed. And you didn't just lose, you got embarrassed and punked at the crib by the Green Bay Packers. And so that's 2 out of those 3 years where you went 12-5, where you bowed out in the first round at home. You did it to the Niners 3 years ago. You did it to the Packers this past year. And in the middle, you were on the road because you didn't win the division that year. And you went and won at Tampa Bay, and then you lost in a game that you probably should have won against San Francisco on the road. So at the end of the day, it feels like NFC Championship game or bust for Mike McCarthy, which is crazy because I don't know how you get much better. Like, I'm not like, you can find a better coach, but I don't know like what the Cowboys do. Like, let's say you go out and you get Bill Belichick, who technically is a better coach, but are the Cowboys going to be better because you got Bill Belichick? You can go out and find, some ridiculous coach that maybe Ben Johnson, let's just say he, tears it up in Detroit yet again, and he's ready to take a job and he wants a ready-made job. That's apparent. Cowboys are a ready-made team. If they fire Mike McCarthy after another stellar season, let's say this year they go 11-6. They don't go 12-5, but they go 11-6. They don't win the division, but they do win a playoff game, but they lose in the divisional round. And Jerry Jones says, all right, I had enough of this shit, and he fires him. That's a playoff team 4 years in a row, double-digit wins 4 years in a row. You just might need somebody to take you over the top. Maybe it's Ben Johnson. I don't know, right? We'll see. But it does feel like it's a big season for Mike McCarthy. Like, he needs to win and win big. Like, I don't think just getting to the playoffs is going to be good enough this year to keep his job. That's what it kind of feels like. Kevin, the PRF, been a member for 25 months. Last elite receiver to win the Super Bowl, aside from Hill, was 07 Colts with Harrison and Wayne, but that's the only one either got. Yeah, because Peyton only won one Super Bowl in Indy. It's hard, man. I mean, I'll take your word for it. I believe you because, again, there were a lot of Patriot Super Bowls in there. A lot of teams that, what's crazy is when you look at the runner-ups, a lot of elite receivers were runners-up, right, in the Super Bowl. A lot of runner-up receivers. Julio Jones in 2016 and Randy Moss in 2007. We could probably keep going. There's a lot of guys that showed up and didn't get it done. Cooper Kupp in 2018, right? Like a lot of dudes that were elite receivers who made it to the Super Bowl, they just didn't win it, right? Tyreek Hill in 2020. We can keep going. We see it all the time. AJ Brown and Devontae Smith in 2022. It happens all the time. But Jamar Chase in 2021, right? I guess that's the last time. I guess we skipped over Cooper Kupp. 2021, Cooper Kupp won a Super Bowl. He's elite. Cooper Kupp's elite. So Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp is the last receiver to do it. 2021. And before him, it's Tyreek Hill in 19. And then you go all the way to 07, probably. Then you probably got to go all the way to 07. That year in the Super Bowl in 2021, you had two elite receivers on both sides. Somebody was going to win a Super Bowl. Cooper Kupp on one side and Jamar Chase on the other side. So it's not often that you see that, but it happened in 2021. Let's get to the comment section real quick. See what we got. Kevin the PRF says wide receiver is like the running back position, most overrated position. And some people feel that way. I don't agree with that take. I don't think it's the most overrated position, but I do think it's a position that it's a glamorous position. It gets a lot of attention because they make plays and you can see them. And so that's why they hold so much space in the hearts of fans. And that's why they get paid the kind of money. People pay to see Justin Jefferson, make plays. People pay to see Jamar Chase get vertical on somebody and score a 73-yard touchdown. Like, people love seeing that. But when it's all said and done, are they impacting the game when it matters the most? That's the real question. That's the real question. John Wynn says, Boye Mafe and Bobby Wagner, good with sacks on QBs. I miss having them in Seattle. Boye Mafe's not in Seattle anymore? Didn't y'all just draft him? He's got to still be in Seattle. You must just be talking about Bobby Wagner. John Wynn says, Wolves would have won the trophy in the finals. Felt so bad for Wolves fans. No, they wouldn't have won. I talked about the lack of experience. Like, that's a real thing in the NBA. They weren't going to just show up and beat the Boston Celtics, just like they couldn't just show up and beat the Mavericks. They weren't good enough. They had chances, right? That lack of experience cost them a couple of games. They had some games where they were right there at the end. They led at the end with less than 5 minutes in every single one of the games except for game 5. They led. And they lost 3 out of 4 of them. That's that lack of experience that I'm talking about. That's that lack of experience that I'm talking about. Luka Doncic is cold-blooded, man. He's a cold-blooded assassin. I'm scared of that man. John Wynn says, I hope Russell Wilson kept his money and stays in Pittsburgh throughout the season. He's going to have to hold off Justin Fields. He's going to have to play well. That's for dang on sure. He's going to have to play well. Niners fan says, you need to try and get Bucky and DJ on the show, Lou. You always do a great job. I still remember the Teron Davenport interview a few years back. That was great. Yeah, I'm actively trying to work to get some people on the show. It's hard tracking these dudes down and finding the best line of communication for them. I just got to be more persistent. Sometimes I'll reach out, I don't hear anything, and I'll just go about my business. I got to be persistent because that's how you're going to get these guys. I'm going to keep trying on my end to make it happen because I want to talk to these guys, and I know you want to hear from some of these guys as well. Let's see. Kevin the PRF writes, the Bengals stuck paying Chase and Burrow. You think they're the odd team out in picking perennial Super Bowl participants in the foreseeable future? No, because they just drafted a beast receiver. Now, I might be a little higher on him than most, but they just drafted the receiver out of Alabama that I absolutely loved. His name is escaping me right now, but they took him in the 3rd round. And I think this dude is going to be a stud receiver. So that's what you have to do. Like, you got to keep replenishing. Like, you can't let it get to the point where the cupboard is bare. Keep replenishing the product. That's what they've been doing. So as far as I'm concerned, they're going to be just fine. If Burrow's healthy, and again, until this is not a thing, Joe Burrow, every year that he's been healthy, has made it to the AFC Championship game. No worse than the AFC Championship game. He's had 4 years in the NFL. 2 of those years he did not finish, his rookie season and this past season. The 2 years in the middle, AFC Championship game and Super Bowl loss. Okay. So, it was vice versa. It was Super Bowl and then the AFC Championship game. So until otherwise notified, if he's healthy, I got the Bengals, sniffing around. They got a talented football team still, right? Still got a talented football team. I don't think they're the odd team out. Yeah, Jermaine Burton. Thank you, guys. User XJT3 and Kevin the PRF. Jermaine Burton, I think he's going to be a stud. So I don't foresee the Bengals falling off the map. I know they moved on from Joe Mixon. What did they do at running back? Did they draft a running back this year? Did they sign one in free agency? I'm actually interested to see what they did. Let me see what the Cincinnati Bengals running backs. See what they did. No, so they got Chase Brown still, who I like coming out of Illinois, and he played well at times last year, but that can't be. That can't be who they just said, all right, we're gonna roll with Chase Brown. Maybe they did. Let me see. Would have thought that they would have done something. All right. How come I'm only seeing one running back here? It's got to be more dudes than this. Okay, they got them listed as H-backs. Yeah, I mean, they signed Zach Moss. Yeah, they don't. I mean, they're gonna ride with Yeah, this is a dookie backfield. They're gonna ride with Chase Brown. Okay. And I'm not mad at that. I think he can handle it, but I'm shocked. Not gonna front. I thought they would have done a little bit more. At least added one guy, and I guess that's what Zach Moss is for. To be a solid guy back there. Ugh. We'll see what that ends up being for them, but I think they're gonna be just fine. I like the Bengals, and until Joe Burrow is no longer healthy and stays healthy for a full season and doesn't make it to the AFC Championship game, I'm just going to keep riding that narrative. I digress. Let's get to our final segment of the show since we have no more comments. Garbage time. So, the NFL made its decision for Hard Knocks, and that decision to me was a no-brainer. The Bears. So, remember last year, the NFL had a choice of 4 teams that they could choose from for Hard Knocks: Chicago Bears, Washington Commanders, New Orleans Saints, Chicago, and New York Jets. Those were the 4 teams that didn't meet the criteria. You have 3. Remember, you have 3 things. Any one of them could eliminate you, and you could then decline to be on Hard Knocks. If you hit any one of these 3 markers, you don't have to be on Hard Knocks. You can decline to participate. The first being just simply make the playoffs once in any of the last 2 seasons. All you have to do is make the playoffs one time in any of the last 2 seasons. If you've done that, you can say, nah, I'm good on Hard Knocks. So that's why you don't see good teams like the 49ers or the Chiefs or teams like that on Hard Knocks, because they're in the playoffs, and rarely do they miss the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. Meanwhile, or the next thing rather, is having been on the show in the last decade. If you've done that, then you don't have to be on the show. And then the last thing is have a new coach. If you got a new coach, too many changes going on, we're not going to put the stress of the cameras on you and your group. You're free to go and have a training camp with your first-year head coach without any distractions, right? So last year was interesting because we talked about the Bears, and we were like, could be interesting with Justin Fields and kind of seeing what that situation is going to look like. I think that was the closest it came to the Commanders being up there, but we still didn't have a storyline. The quarterback situation with Sam Howell wasn't sexy. Ronald Rivera isn't an entertaining guy. I mean, he's been on these shows before. They did a show that they do on Amazon Prime in season, and I remember watching it. It was actually pretty good, but the main draw there was Cam Newton. It wasn't Ron Rivera, but so the Commanders, having Daniel Snyder be out and Josh Harris in was a bit of a draw, I think, but it just wasn't enough. And it was easy. Nobody wants to see the Saints, and the Jets were clearly the easiest team to pick. Having Aaron Rodgers come to town, all the expectations that come with it, it was a no-brainer. Take the Jets, and they did. But the beauty of that was, and they had the foresight, and I think they might have said this to themselves. I doubt they said this to themselves, because they couldn't have known that the Bears would end up with the number 1 overall pick, and get Caleb Williams. But it worked, and their head coach not get fired, because generally speaking, if you end up with the number 1 pick, which the Bears did not earn via their own poor record, but rather the Panthers, poor record from the year before when they traded out of the number 1 overall pick to allow the Panthers to get Bryce Young. But they still weren't a very good team, and they were this close to firing their head coach this past year. So, but they didn't. So they weren't disqualified. I know the NFL was like, yes, when they didn't fire their head coach Matt Eberflus, because what that essentially did was it set the stage. The Bears haven't made the playoffs in 4 or 5 years. The last time they were in the playoffs, Mitchell Trubisky was their starting quarterback. So that tells you how long it's been. He hasn't been in Chicago for at least 4 or 5 years. They haven't been on Hard Knocks, I don't think, ever. I don't think they've ever been on Hard Knocks. I think this will be their first time. And they don't have a new head coach. So it just all kind of fell in place for this. And, Caleb Williams is this polarizing figure. They're going to follow him around. They traded for Keenan Allen. He's a guy that is very boisterous and demonstrative. They're probably going to have the cameras on him. We'll see what happens with DJ Moore. They just signed running back DeAndre Swift. We'll see if he's, if so. They got a lot of guys that could end up being characters. We don't know their personalities, but we're sure going to find out, right? So they'll be interesting. But the main draw is going to be Caleb Williams, and I can't wait to see what happens there with Caleb Williams and how that situation goes. And it fell into place for him, honestly, with them not getting rid of Matt Eberflus and them drafting Caleb Williams. It's a no-brainer. Like, remember how deep into the summer we went last year before a decision was made? Like, they mulled over that decision. I don't know if they wanted the Jets. I think the Jets resisted for a very long time, and then they ultimately got the thumbs up. Like, the Bears clearly just said, yeah, no, come on. Like, they didn't have a choice, though. And the NFL was, and HBO was very clear who they wanted, because Washington is no longer, in that pool because we have a new head coach. I would assume the Saints are still in there, right? Because they didn't make the playoffs. They don't have a new head coach, and they haven't been on it. They haven't been on it in a decade. I was about to say Jameis Winston was up there, but that was when he was in Tampa. I don't think the Saints have ever been on it. So they're probably still – nobody wants to see the Saints, though, right? Nobody cares to see the Saints unless you're a Saints fan. So I don't know what the list looked like this year in terms of the teams that were eligible to be on there, but it couldn't have been a lot of teams because we've seen a ton of parity in the NFL the last couple of years. So, for instance, a team like Jacksonville, well, they just made the playoffs. A team like Houston, they just made the playoffs. A team like Tennessee, they got a brand new head coach, right? So can't put the Titans up there. We could go through the divisions. You could probably do something like that for every single team, and not, find yourself having them be an option. I wonder if the Steelers were available because I don't think they've made the playoffs the last 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. I know they snuck in the playoffs one year, and I remember talking to Steel City, and he was like, I don't even want to go to the playoffs because we're just going to get beat up. I'm wondering if that was the year before, though, or was that 3 years ago? It could have been 2 years ago, and if that's the case, then they wouldn't be eligible. I'm trying to think of the year that they snuck in the back door of the playoffs, and then they lost. I don't think it was 2 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago. Anyway, Steelers might have been eligible. The Ravens aren't eligible. The Bengals aren't eligible, and the Browns aren't eligible. They made the playoffs this year. So you go to the next division, AFC South. We already did that. That whole division is pretty much out. Indy didn't make the playoffs the last 2 years, but they did do I wonder if the in-season counts. They did in-season Hard Knocks. Indianapolis Colts did back in 2021. I wonder if that counts too, because the Arizona Cardinals did the in-season Hard Knocks. The Dolphins just did the in-season Hard Knocks. I wonder if that rules you out. Like, does that count for training camp with Hard Knock, or does that only rule you out for the in-season, right? I wonder how that works. That's a great question. I'm going to have to get some clarification on that. Let's see. AFC East. Bills made the playoffs. Dolphins made the playoffs. Jets, they were up there last year, and the Patriots got a new head coach. So they're out. AFC West. Chiefs made the playoffs. Raiders got a new head coach. Chargers got a new head coach. Broncos probably were eligible, but who wants to see the Denver Broncos? So I think the Broncos were eligible. I wonder if the Colts were eligible in the AFC. Those two teams right now are the only two that I could see as being eligible. And I'm not even sure about the Colts. The Broncos definitely were eligible. Unless they had Hard Knocks over the last decade. I'm not sure if they did. I don't think they did. You go to the NFC, Dallas not eligible, or you can just decline. Like the Cowboys were on Hard Knocks a couple of years ago, and they had already been on Hard Knocks in the last decade, and they made the playoffs Like they just wanted to be up. They volunteered. You can volunteer, but you can say no if you meet one of the 3 criteria, right? So Dallas, no. The Giants have a wait, timeout. So Giants haven't made the playoffs. Wait, they made the playoffs 2 years ago. Yep, because they didn't make it this year, but the year before they made the playoffs. So Giants, Cowboys, no. Giants, no. Eagles, no. Commanders have a new head coach, no. NFC, that was East. West, Rams made the playoffs, no. Cardinals, I think they're eligible because they haven't made the playoffs in 2 years, but they were on the in season. That's why I don't know if that matters or not. But they don't have a new head coach, so I wonder if that in season rules you out because technically they were on Hard Knocks. And then the Seahawks made the playoffs, not this past year, but the year before. So no for them. Then you go to the NFC North. The Bears are on. Packers playoffs, no. Lions playoffs, no. Vikings playoffs the year before, so they don't have to be on it. And then the NFC South, Bucks just made the playoffs. Falcons have a new head coach, so no for them. Panthers have a new head coach, so nobody wanted to see them anyway, but they have a new head coach as well. And the Saints, I think, were still eligible, and nobody wants to see them. So I think the eligible teams were the Saints, the Bears, the Colts. If the in-season doesn't count, then the Cardinals would be as well. I think the in-season counts, though. So I think the only eligible teams were the Bears, the Steelers, I think, didn't make it. I think they made it 3 years ago, not 2. If that's true, then it's the Bears, the Steelers, the Saints, and the Broncos. Those were the 4 teams. Ugh. So, I mean, the Bears bailed them out, to be honest with you. If we keep in score at home, I think the Bears bailed them out. Anyway. Anthony King. He says, is Mike Evans not elite? Yes, he is elite. So you had it's still so yes. 3 years in a row, you had elite receivers win the Super Bowl. Cooper Kupp in 21, Evans in 20, and Tyreek Hill in 19. Then you have that long gap. So you're spot on, Anthony King. Mike Evans is absolutely elite. We do that to him too often, and I will not stand for Mike Evans' disrespect here on this podcast. The man has set an NFL record that I don't think anybody else is going to break, which is 10 straight seasons of 1,000 yards receiving to start his career. I don't see anybody else breaking that. Like Justin Jefferson seemed like a candidate, and then he got injured last year, and he didn't hit 1,000 yards. Did he hit 1,000 yards last year? Let me see. I'm actually interested now. He was killing it early in the season, but I don't think he hit it before he got hurt. Shit, damn if he didn't. Still crept over 1,000. He's the dude that could do it. Like that man had 68 catches and still had 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Listen to these numbers for Justin Jefferson. This is insane. Rookie season, 88 catches, 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns. Second season, 108 catches, 1,616 yards, and 10 touchdowns. His third season, 128 catches, 1,809 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So check this out. Every year, his catch total increased by 20, right? And every year, his yardage production increased by 200 yards. Ridiculous production, man. It went from 88 to 108 to 128. It went from 1,400 to 1,600 to 1,800. The touchdowns fluctuate, but he was well on his way with just 68 catches, which is crazy. Every year, his number ends in terms of catches ends in 8, which is odd, right? So every year it's been in 20 catch increments. So this year was 68. His rookie year was 88. The next year was 108, and his best year was 128. Isn't that crazy in terms of symmetry when you're talking about numbers? But yeah, if anybody can do it, it's Justin Jefferson. If he's healthy, he'll probably be the guy to do it. Now, it'll be interesting to see what he does with a rookie quarterback. No Kirk Cousins for the first time in his career, but zoinks! Scoob! Anyway, I digress. Kevin, the PR says the Steelers were in the playoffs. Were they in the playoffs? They weren't in the playoffs. They missed the playoffs last year. Because Tomlin stormed out of the press conference after the last game of the season. He stormed out. They didn't make the playoffs last year. They might have made it the year before that. I can't remember if they did or not the year prior to that. But they didn't make the playoffs this past season. And Kevin the PRF says, why not the Giants? They made the playoffs the year before. So they didn't make it in 2023, but remember, they made it in remember, the entire division made it in 2022, except for Washington. So they made it one of the last 2 years, so they don't have to be included. That's why the Giants wouldn't be in there. Telly's World, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Telly writes, I think De'Ami Brown will break out this year. Hold on, timeout. The Steelers 1 year made it to the playoffs, and TJ Watt got hurt at the end, and he wanted to play, but he couldn't play. Was that this year? Did the Steelers really make it this year? No way, they didn't make it. Let me think about the matchups in the first round. So it was Browns and Texans, and it was Chiefs and Dolphins, right? And I'm missing a game because that's only 2. It should be 3 games, right? Only one team has a bye. So the 1 seed was the Ravens. The Bills played the Steelers, didn't they? They must have. Who'd the Bills play? It had to be the Steelers, didn't it? Who played quarterback for them? No, was that this year? Am I tripping? So the Bills were the 2 seed. The Chiefs were the 3 seed. The Texans were the 4 seed. The Texans played the 5 seed, which was the Browns. The Dolphins were the 6 seed because they played the 3 seed, which was the Chiefs in the first round in that super cold game. And the Bills played who? Was it really the Steelers? There's no way it was the Steelers. Let me go through the teams in the conference real quick. So AFC East only had the Bills and the Dolphins in. AFC North, the Bengals didn't make it. The Ravens did. The Browns, we're going to put the Steelers on hold for a second. The AFC South was a 1-bid division, so only one team got in, and that was the Texans. AFC West, the Chiefs got in, and it was the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're right. So that was this year then. TJ Watt got hurt, and he couldn't play. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. That's crazy. I forgot all about their asses. Kevin the PRF, thank you for correcting me there. So the Steelers wouldn't have been eligible then. So it was this year then. I was talking to Steel City this year, and he's like, I don't want to go to the playoffs. We're just going to get beat. I'm sick of Tomlin, yada, yada, yada. It was this year. It had to be this year. I just remember that. It felt like a very recent conversation, but it starts to all run together after a while. Thank you, Kevin the PRF, for fact checking me there. So the Steelers would not have been eligible either. I'm not drunk. Whatever, Kevin. All right. It's a lot of knowledge up here. Sometimes, what's the commercial? In order to remember something, you got to forget something, right? That's what the commercial said. In order to remember something, you got to forget. I forgot that the Steelers were in the playoffs. Shoot me. Telly's World. Thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Telly writes, I think De'Ami Brown will break out this year. Curtis is gone, no depth behind him, and he's a legit deep threat. What says you? I won't say breakout. That's pretty strong language. I think, first of all, he's got to make the team. He's got to make the roster, which I am adamant that he's going to be on the 53-man roster. But there are a lot of people that think he could be in danger of missing that cut. I still have my doubts there because if nothing else, he's still a damn good special teams player. And I think he holds value there. But at the end of the day, I really believe that he'll get some opportunities, but I think they're really going to focus on the top three dudes, Terry, Jahan, and Luke. And so if those guys are healthy, I can't see De'Ami having a massive impact, but he'll get some targets. He'll get some touches, but I can't see him having a breakout season. I think they really like Luke. And after Terry and Jahan at the receiver position, I think Luke is going to be the next highest guy from a target perspective. So I can't see this being a breakout season for De'Ami. What I can see him doing, though, is being a solid contributor that allows him to end up somewhere next year on a solid, 1-year deal to try to prove it to another team. He doesn't do anything this year in Washington. He'll end up somewhere next year. He'll get an opportunity somewhere else, but it'll be like you're not guaranteed a roster spot. You're coming in here to compete to make an NFL roster. You play well this year, let's say, 37 catches, 437 yards. He'll get a 1-year deal and he'll probably be on a roster next year. He needs that type of a season. He hasn't had one of those yet. He needs one of those seasons. I don't think, and I honestly don't think he's a real deep threat either. I never felt like he was a true, legit, oh my God, he scares the living bejesus and daylights out of you type guy. He barely gets behind the defender. Now, he gets behind guys sometimes, but it's not enough separation where you're like, oh man, this guy's got to watch him, right? We'll see. I think as a fourth option, he could do damage. I think he could do damage. DJ23, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB, who writes, we eligible for in-season Hard Knocks. I don't know how that works. I'm gonna do some research on that. Figure out what the criteria for in-season Hard Knocks is. Does that actually contribute to you not having to be on the training camp version of the Hard Knocks series? Now they got the off-season Hard Knocks. Did you see that? Is that a real thing with the Giants this year? Is that a real thing or no? When is that even going to be? When have they been filming that already? When is that going to air? Is that even a real thing, or did somebody make that up and they were pulling our leg? I haven't heard anything else about it. I saw like promotions; they seem legit, but then my memory's a little hazy, and I'm not sure if it was on a reputable account. I think that's a real thing. Hard Knocks all season with the New York Giants. What does that even entail? Are we going to be getting an in-depth behind the scenes look at them free agency wise and in the draft and all of that stuff? Because a lot of teams already do that on their own sites. As a Washington fan, we get we already saw what they were doing at the Senior Bowl. We already saw what they were doing at the Combine. We already saw, what they did we saw bits and pieces of the draft. They're going to put out an episode that kind of highlights the draft here at some point. So we're already getting that stuff. And a lot of teams, we're not the only team that does that. So what are you actually showing us other than the only thing that we really didn't get access to was free agency? And maybe they'll show us that as well. But I don't know. We'll see. I gotta figure out what that means. DC Dude, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB, who writes, meant to send my last super chat from this account, Lou. This is Telly. Got you. Love you, bro. Keep doing your thing. I appreciate you, man. I didn't know that was you, DC Dude. I should have, because we've had conversations after we've had conversations on the show on social media. So I should have known that was you, but now that's etched in my memory that DC dude is you. Because we've had conversations on the show before, and then it's spilled over on the social media. But anyway, I digress. I appreciate you, man, as always. Telly. Kevin the PRF says Giants offseason Hard Knocks July 2nd through the 9th. So they're trying to fill that void when there's absolutely nothing going on. It's so you're telling me that they're going to show it like on consecutive days, because normally Hard Knocks is a weekly program. So they're going to show them in consecutive days. Is that what you're telling me? So the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, or is it going to be like every other day? The 2nd, the 4th, the 6th, the 8th or whatever. You said through the 9th. So are there 7 episodes? 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. Are there 8 episodes? Huh. Interesting. I have to look that up. So that'll be something that we'll talk about on the podcast at a later date and time. Interesting stuff. But I digress. It's a 5-part series on Max. Well, I know Max has the rights to Hard Knocks. 5-part series. So let's see. I'm lost because those days don't add up. Like the 2nd, there's 8 days. You can't split up 8 days equally with 5 installments over a 7-day period. So I'm confused as to how that's going to work. It'd be one thing if it were 4, then you could say, okay, they won every other day, right? Like 2nd, 4th, 6th, and then the last episode could be on the 9th, right? But well, I guess you could still do that. 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, and then you got the last episode on the 9th, I guess. Huh. Interesting. Well, I'll find out like how they're gonna do it, and I guess I'm somewhat interested in what this is about. I'm assuming that it's just, okay, they're doing free agency, and then they're going to transition to the Senior Bowl, and then the Combine, and then they're going to show them in the war room, kind of putting their draft board together. They're not going to show us the names or anything like that, but they're going to we're going to be in on some of those conversations that they're having about prospects. And then I'm assuming they're going to take us to their war room during the draft and, signing those players and those press conferences, and then maybe even the OTAs. We may get some of that too. So I guess it might be interesting. We'll see. Anyway, I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this final installment of the Louie T Network podcast for the month of May. If you're on the East Coast, it's already June. Okay. So next time we chop it up, we will be in the month of June officially, and we'll be getting closer and closer to that dead period of the NFL season. That's when I'll start filling the time with, some stories, and we'll have some, throwback Thursdays, some way back Wednesdays, some flashback Fridays, and all of that good jazz. And we'll tap into some nostalgia, if you will, here on the Louie T Network. We're getting very close to that point of the season. But in any event, that's going to do it for me. So Kevin the PRF updated. He says, "Oh, my mistake. You need to go to bed. You're drunk." Nah, I'm playing. He says, the premiere is on July 2nd, a week through the 30th. So that makes more sense. 1 per week, the 2nd through the end of the month, because the new Hard Knocks won't start until like the 2nd week of August, right? Normally, I think it starts after the Hall of Fame game. So, and then it runs all the way through to September. So that makes more sense than the 2nd through the 9th. That was crazy. So yeah, I could see that 1 episode per week from the 2nd to the 30th. That makes a lot more sense. So you'll get the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, and the 30th. So that's your 5 installments. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you for the clarification, Kevin, the PRF. So I'll be on the lookout for that at the beginning of July. And I'll remind you guys as we get closer to that date. So anyway, you guys get out of here. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Hopefully you have a tremendous weekend. It is now June. And so we're getting ever so close to the start of training camp. Most teams are going to have 1 or 2 more sessions of OTAs and minis. You'll have a mandatory mini here shortly. And then after that, it goes dark for a month. And then after we emerge from that darkness, it's time. It's time. It's football time. But we got a ways to go. Anyway, y'all get out of here. I'll see you guys next time. Y'all know what it is. Take care. God bless. Good night.